The title of the module this is in is Enlightenment and the End of First Wave Imperialism. The Enlightenment, as we're going to see, is something we can talk about as a cause of the end of first wave imperialism. But we're going to do things a little backwards and talk about the effect before we talk about the cause. So the effect is the close of first wave European imperialism. And you guys already know part of this story. Does anybody recognize the man standing in the boat in this painting? And you guys know who this man is, and you have definitely seen this painting in probably textbooks in elementary school, probably more than one textbook in elementary school, and then again in middle school. Who is it? Yeah, George Washington. Be bold, Michael. You had the right answer. Right? It is George Washington. And speaking of bold, I mean, that's a bold man to stand up in an overcrowded boat in an icy river on what looks like a kind of stormy day. But I guess you get to be the general in charge of all of the continental armies, right, by being bold. Because we're still doing EOC testing. That should be done after this week. Now, the other image, I don't expect that as many, if any of you will know who that is. He does not figure as prominently in our textbooks, but that is Simón Bolívar. And he was a leader in several of the independence movements in Latin America. So what are the empires that were ended? When we talk about first wave European empires, that tells you there is going to be a second wave, and we'll be talking about that soon. But the first wave of European empire refers to two different types. We kind of already hinted at this. In the first type of imperialism, we have the very intensive colonization in the Americas, where lots of territory is being controlled. Okay, settlers are moving in. And I should point out, this is a map only of the Spanish Empire. So if you're wondering why the 13 colonies aren't in it, why it looks like nobody has claimed any of Canada, it's because this is just the Spanish. But the Spanish Empire helps us illustrate both types of imperialism. Because on the other hand, outside of the Americas, we have very limited colonial footprints in Africa and in Asia. For the most part, around Africa and Asia, we just have all these little named dots, which are essentially just trading posts. We have a few areas, what's now Sri Lanka, what's now the Philippines. Those were areas we can see there's a little more intensive colonization, but for the most part, it's a very small footprint compared especially to the intensive colonization in the Americas. We're going to talk about the end of the first wave as kind of two different ways that it ended. One is the Europeans lost their colonies in the Americas. Not all of them, but lots of them, and especially for the Spanish. The first of the independence movements we know about. It's the 13 British colonies becoming 13 states of the modern U.S. This War of Independence is fought over a roughly 8-year span. I know some of you are thinking, didn't it start in 1776? 1776 is important. That's when we issued, right, the Continental Congress issued the Declaration of Independence, but the war is actually going on and has been going on well before that declaration is written. The other source of loss of colonies, as I said, the Spanish lose a lot of theirs, are the Latin American independence movements. Now, there are more than one, right? Hence the plural there. And it plays out over a longer period of time, from 1808 on to 1826. So there's a pretty big lag between the American War of Independence and the independence movements and their wars in Latin America. And then, of course, the Latin Americans takes longer for those to all play out. Adding on to the loss of colonies, we have a loss of opportunity to take them back or for a different country to move in and take over territory that had been a colony of a different European country. And that story is mostly about the growing strength, especially military strength, of the United States. One of the signals of this is the not too creatively named War of 1812, which is fought from 1812 to 1814. It's often referred to by a better name, the Second War of Independence, the argument being here that the U.S. showed that they could stand up to the British and would fight for their rights, like neutrality, the right to do business with any country they wanted to. You'll learn some more about that when you learn about the background for World War I and American neutrality next year. The war itself is otherwise pretty indecisive, okay? But it does, again, show that the U.S. will stand up for its rights and that it can go toe-to-toe with one of the world's most powerful countries. We skip ahead a little more than a decade. The U.S. is even more confident. It's growing, it's expanding, it's getting stronger, to the point that President Monroe, in 1823, in a speech to Congress, issues what is now called the Monroe Doctrine. And this often happens with U.S. presidents. They give a speech to Congress about foreign policy, some idea of how the U.S. should do foreign policy, and it becomes a doctrine. You have the Monroe Doctrine. Next year, you will learn about the Truman Doctrine of containment in the Cold War. If you have one of those teachers who really gets through things quickly and is able to bring you pretty close to the present, you will probably learn about the Bush Doctrine of preemptive war. Monroe Doctrine states that the U.S. is not going to tolerate any new taking of colonies by Europeans in the Americas. And that's all of the Americas, North and South. And this is coming before all of the Latin American wars of independence have played out. Remember, they will carry on until 1826. And for those newly independent countries, the U.S. is not going to accept political interference by Europeans. There's one thing that you will see that Europeans sometimes like to do is, for example, send a monarch to go rule a country when really behind the scenes the European country is pulling the strings and making that monarch do what the European country wants it to do. And we're saying we're not going to tolerate that kind of thing. And this may sound kind of nice. The U.S. sounds like it's sticking up for its fellow newly independent countries. And there is some of that. But the U.S. is not being selfless. For example, the U.S. was very happy to get military aid from France during our own War of Independence. But when the Latin American wars get going and their leaders ask the United States for military help, the United States says, nope. And if you want independence, you're going to have to win it for yourselves. Also, there's nothing in the Monroe Doctrine that says the U.S. is not going to itself take territory in the Americas. We're going to see it do a lot of that. It will go to war with Mexico and take huge area of Mexican territory. And the United States will, for the next 200 years, be interfering in the politics and governments of countries in Latin America. So don't read this as Uncle Sam being a super nice, benevolent guy. So the first part of the end of first wave European imperialism has to do with the loss of colonies and a loss of opportunity to have influence or take new colonies in the Americas. But there's also a shift of focus. The Europeans now begin really building their empires in a much more intensive way in Africa and Asia. And there are just countless political cartoons showing European countries just taking parts of Africa and Asia. This one, of course, being a grab bag. Sometimes it's portrayed as a pie being sliced up. Now, of course, some of that story is the Europeans are going where they still can because they've lost opportunities in the Americas. But they are also going to see plenty of opportunities to enrich themselves by taking over other parts of the world. Although I should be careful talking about enriching themselves. It turns out that building empires really only benefits some people. Most of the time, in the long run, it seems the evidence suggests that empires cost far more than they're worth. And we're going to see some people like Adam Smith making that argument later on in our notebooks. Now we're starting to get to the cause, since we've already talked about the effect. And as I said, the 13 British colonies that become the United States. And yes, I know some of you may be wondering, like, isn't Vermont part of that? They actually weren't. But, of course, they do become part of the United States later. So why did 13 British colonies throw off European rule? On the one hand, we've got to understand, from the perspective of the British and from the perspective of the Spanish when it comes to Latin America, these people aren't freedom fighters seeking independence. They're just rebels who need to be crushed. And from the British, we look like particularly ungrateful rebels. The British have taken this territory. They've allowed English to come settle there, and some other people as well. They have helped the settlers fight a war, the French and Indian War, to protect them. And now the Americans are going to rebel and tell the British to get out. So why? In some readings and work you're going to do soon, you're going to learn what motivated the colonists to want independence. And some of this stuff is fairly obvious. They don't want to pay the taxes. They don't want to be ruled by a government that's far away. And they don't want to share power with the British. You're also going to learn that they had ideas that they used to justify why they weren't just rebels, why they were actually freedom fighters fighting for liberty and democracy and all those good things. And that's important because when you think about the war between Ukraine and Russia right now, okay, if President Zelensky came to the United States Congress and asked for money and weapons, which he has done, and he just said, Russia took some land. I don't like that. I want to take Ukraine's land back from the Russians. And we don't like them. All right, well, if Brenda's sitting there in Congress like, I don't think that's a good enough reason that I should send billions of dollars and lots of artillery shells to Ukraine. But then Zelensky says, wait, there's more, Brenda. This isn't just a war about Ukraine getting its land back. This is about the fate of democracy in Europe. This is about the fate of Taiwan, because if the Russians win here, the Chinese will be sure that they can grab Taiwan back. Right? No one will stop them. And so this is about democracy. It's about freedom. It's about preventing a Russian genocide of the Ukrainian people. And Brenda's like, whoa, okay, guys, stop there. Right, you've sold me. Here's, I think the last money we cut them was close to $100 billion. Money and weapons, and I'm not sure what all was in that grab bag of stuff. I also am not trying to put it down as a grab bag of stuff that we shouldn't be sending to the Ukrainians. But ideas are important. Even if they're not part of the motivation, they're part of the idea of how we sell what we're doing to other people. And those ideas came from the Enlightenment. Which you can kind of see as the root cause, especially if you believe that the founders really did believe in those Enlightenment ideas. And I also don't want to suggest that they didn't believe in those Enlightenment ideas. Tomorrow is not when you're going to learn about the Enlightenment. Tomorrow you're going to learn about the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, because those are two developments in Europe that help get us to the Enlightenment. And I want you to have that background first. These are the end of the notes for today and for this assignment in your notebooks. What you should do at this point is head back to the module and work on that extra credit, or if you haven't turned in your Columbian Exchange mini project yet, now would be a good time to get that done, because for most of you it was due at the start of today's school day. All right, please be